նյութերը եւ այլն։ Ուրեմն այդ տեխնոլոգիաների խումբը միասին եւ կազմում են 4-րդ հեղափոխությունը։
Շնորհակալություն։ Պարզ է, եթե խոսում ենք տնտեսության մասին, որ տնտեսության զարգացման վրա եւ ամբողջ աշխարհում եւ Հայաստանում անշուշտ
the entire world and in Armenia, what negatively has affected economy is COVID. In Armenia, this has been multiplied by the factor of the war, by the influence of the war. What does that mean, Mr. Indjikian? Well, no one expected it, of course. I mean, the pandemic to happen on a large scale, on scales like this. But what is interesting is that within the great changes that life offers and throws at us, at humans, that is to say, people cannot travel, for instance, they're deprived of that opportunity, and they have to work from home, among other changes. Paradoxically, this new forced revolution allowed to quickly and fastly adapt to this new reality. So people started to quite effectively, efficiently work from home, which in its turn means that the companies in the future will be thinking in the direction of how to organize their activities so that we don't have to occupy so many business buildings. That is to say, an entire paradigm is shifting. You mean it's a cultural logic? It is a logic within the culture that is shifting. However, of course, there is the opposite side that I would like to highlight. Another point is that because we're talking about development, about the development that should not affect the nature, should not affect the climate on a global scale, then it should be said that these conversations have now become central because the CO2 emissions have decreased in their level. And as a result, we should say that we, the economists, were thinking about the future model of development that the entire economy should adopt and take on. And of course, we see President Biden that is also supporting the direction towards a more clean, a more modern economic development. In this respect, COVID has had a large role, we should say. And the main question is whether the states, and mostly where the big states, European states, US, China, how they will be developing their economic policy, whether it will be based on economic growth only, solely on economic growth, or also on a quality growth that would not affect and change our surrounding climate and nature. We imagine more or less how the global economy is changing. What can be the role of Armenia in it? And what is the place that Armenia can occupy in its significance for the world, or at least regional economy? The question is of utmost interest, and I have been dealing with this question starting with the 1990s, when I have started to work with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. But I was the head of the e-commerce program, and I also was working with the project Armenia 2020, initiated by Rouben Indjikian and Nubar Afeyan. And I remember that back in 2003, it was in Athens, in Greece. It was a hotel late in the evening, and we were panning down one of the best scenarios of development of Armenia. It was related with the Singapore scenario. Why? Because it was already clear that being the Silicon Valley-like part developing country following the collapse of the USSR. Armenia had a great educational system, had great Academy of Sciences, notable stars, if that's the right word, for our precise sciences, natural sciences. So all of this quickly moved towards the development, towards the vector of the development of information technologies, and Armenia thus became, I should say, it became one of the symbols of development. I would say it's Yervan Zorian, head of Synopsys, who got his background educational in America, came back to Armenia from diaspora, brought his valuable knowledge and skills, and started developing this branch of science in Armenia. And right now, Synopsys has 15,000 employees who are working, who are based in Yerevan. That is to say, Armenia having a great potential to develop information technologies and a variety of knowledge bases and skills in that are present here, Armenia can quickly try to boost the expert of whatever can be digitized and sent via the internet. This, I should say, could become the principal vector, or I would say at least a great vector of the expert potential of Armenia. Here, I'd like to note that there is another opinion as well. And the alternative opinion lies in the fact that entering competition with great and large IT organizations is not something that Armenia can do. As a consequence, Armenia has to occupy a secondary role. That is to say, we need to become a cheap workforce for these large companies on a world scale, on a global scale, and we would become a hub for that. This is what we're doing right now in terms of the IT technologies, I would say, because we have great branches of great companies that are solving local issues, or let's say smaller issues. So IT technologies are not really advancing at lightning speed in this way. This is just a piece of opinion that I've heard, towards which I'd like to hear your comments. With utmost pleasure. The answer to the approach you have highlighted can be the following way. To some extent, yes, but mostly no. Why I'm saying that it's to some extent yes, is because in the very beginning, it should be said that famous companies find workforce in Armenia that they are trying and starting to use in their production for chain initiated. Also, in this sense, our talented, gifted engineers and programmers, they're enriching the international company, making them more wealthy because they're part of that company. This is happening, and this is a vector that will continue well into the future. This is called to find your own place, your niche within the global economy that is part of the chain of production of large companies that trips pass throughout many countries. So you become part of the chain that touches upon your country. This actually allows you to have a highly professional employees that also have high quality, and they generate what is happening in Silicon Valley, and this is called a group effect. All employees from Microsoft, Google, they come to bars, they used to talk together, they would exchange ideas, and some of them would say, but this was a good idea, maybe I need to and they started making new startups. Armenia is actually following this of Silicon Valley in that sense, because we have seen and we have Microsoft and we have other companies like Intel. Many works there. There are also Armenian startups present. And these large companies are actually quite cautious towards these young companies. They're trying to understand whether or not to purchase these companies, to make this part their own company. And there are heads who are proud heads of the startups who are. I'm optimistic. Thank you. Now, I'd like to ask the other question. When you talk Armenian, it is largely dependent on import. That is to say, on products that are being imported towards Armenia. Given that export is around 25% of export of, but if I'm not mistaken, or maybe a similar figure, how negative is this for us? And what can we do to balance, to some extent, import and export? That's a brilliant question. Thank you so much for that question. The answer of this question was actually part and basis of my professional work in the 1990s, in the 2000s. I retired from United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in 2011. So conference of 2020, the latest conference, a couple of speeches, Mackay's large speech, and my speech was called How to Develop the Export Potential Boosting Economic Strategies. That is to say, what economic strategy needs to be adopted by a country so that the country is able to capitalize on that, to capitalize and use up its export and make sure that there is a decrease between the ratios, the proportion of export and import to go in this direction. For this purpose, I actually suggested, why did this happen? Well, first of all, it should be said that Armenia experienced a great shock in the 1990s, as a result of which it lost 70% of its economy. After that, when it came to the inner economy, it was in turbulence. There was little to no possibility to develop the investments, and people who could go out, they actually left the country largely and mostly to Russia, and they started sending money back to Armenia, I mean, relatives. The system started. By the way, I've also written a piece or two about that as well, because when I was working in the direction of e-commerce to develop it, when it came to the information economy report that I created at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, I actually wrote about the remittances, where I mentioned two examples of the Armenian system, that where there was this MoneyGram and Western Union, and they were struggling, fighting there, because these two took up a large portion of the market, Unistream and one other system. And that was connected with my good friend, Samvelian. In the big 1990s, we were friends with him. And Armenians and Armenia, they actually tried to introduce new elements to the existing system. They didn't think that would be happy, $1 billion, $2 billion came to Armenia, because it was a very low price for that. Because if this money came to the pockets of local Armenians, that still created a very negative environment where people are consuming someone else's money without actually thinking about the fact on their own, and they are also turning their children towards this system, and they are not thinking of giving education to their children. By the way, part of the money was spent on educational needs of children, so it was not only spent on the consumption of imported products, I should say. But because this didn't create external debt, people actually started affording to import something, and the business people that represent import, they actually were very in a very good position, be it oil or anything else. So, or petrol, let's say. So the system became weakened. And in order to change the system, to challenge the system, I have actually fought for 30 years, talking to all the heads of this country, of Armenia, and explaining to them that we need to allow for companies who can export to be able to export. This should help them, and this should give them actually privileges both in terms of loans, trade, and taxes. But the condition would can it provide, give back or bring back income towards their country, and it enlarges the volume of production. So this is a famous book, was published by UNCAT, and that was our response to global in the 1990s. Yeah, it was the East Asian miracle. They were saying that Korea was actually able to use the economic situation to its benefit. That's why it got the positive results that it did. And we were like, no, actually happened was that economically speaking, Korean country actually created an investment export nexus. That is to say, there was a connection between import and export that was being implemented. And this was super important because it made the companies work well in order to be able to export, but because they also had privileges, they didn't spend all of the income onto buying a beautiful car and houses abroad, but they also brought back the money and invested that in the economy to be able to develop the country. I have talked about this a lot and in great detail with Prime Minister back in it was back in 2010. But I also talked with the previous state representatives, heads of the country, and also ministers of economy, such. You have not. You know what? I should say that I had So today, we're talking currently, we should be saying that in terms of the production and export in Armenia, what is really important is raw materials. This could be in terms of the iron or some metals. Yeah, iron, copper, and also agricultural products. Can it happen so that these products that are exported could boost the development, the economic development of Armenia? What do you think? Well, that Armenia has copper, has some metals, actually is a positive fact. It's an asset for Armenia, Why? Because actually we're seeing that the global economy is in its transition period towards e-cars. And when we're thinking about the importance of oil, it's decreasing, and the metals that are using cars like that or being used to create cars like that, it means that their price has gone up. And that means that the country's budget will be filled with more dollars than in the past. However, during the last 3-4 years, I have been the head of the program of raw materials, and UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, has always tried to help raw producing countries so they could be decreasing their dependence on raw materials. The first option to decrease the dependency on raw materials is to develop the sector of the raw materials with the added value products. That is to say, you're not exporting the raw material, but let's say part of the copper. That is to say, a production that is made of copper. Yeah, that is made based on copper or any other metal. That is to say, the added value can become tenfold more. That is, instead of selling raw material, which is less expensive, you could be doing that. This is called vertical industrialization and integration. That is to say, in terms of the production of that object and product, you start going up in the chain of production of that object. That is to say, it's not only about oil or copper, but actually you're importing a great many products based on this. By the way, I'm thinking that that could be one of the vectors and elements and components of the development of the economy of Armenia. That is to say, that could be a way which needs to be taken so that the products that are largely based on this raw materials of metals like copper are then being exported, because first they're being prepared, made. In that sense, in that respect, I believe it should be said that the sector, because the nature has endowed us with that raw material, would be the best to use it this way, in the most wise way. The dollars that come in because of this and enter our budget, state budget, then I hope the country that would be wise, I hope in the future, it will be thinking within the strategy of export, take on dollars, and through this boost other branches of economy and the potential of their development, of export development. That is to say, the finances, of course, can be based on the market prices, and of course, the market prices can change. This would allow us to create the future of Armenia, and that would be the potential, one of the strategies of development of the country's directions. That is to say, first you create, you should be able to see dollars and the way they are being made, and you would be using it for the diversification of economy to boost the export. All of this sounds pretty well. However, quite often a question arises. How? What steps need to be taken by Armenia to be able to do this? To be able to start this? What I think is that one of the steps would be the transition, the change of the tax system, because our taxing system, I think we have not changed it. We have not altered it anyway. So we need to understand what organizations, what parts of the system need to have privileges and which ones should not have privileges, tax-related privileges. How we need to deal with initiating a business and also with the second and third year businesses. When the business is still new, is at the novice level, how could we do that? And this actually, you're very right, is part of the industrial policy, I should say. There was a Washington consensus back in the 90s, and it became very non-appropriate, inappropriate policy in that the market knows everything, and the market is self-regulating in a way. And the market will decide what to do. That is to say, liberalization, privatization, all of that. All of the countries have actually, and I mean European countries, America, etc., many countries, and where they're talking about the industrial policy, I should say, because when Trump was doing this, it actually was very large, but even Biden's government is thinking about how they would be able to do this in America and how they would be able to modify it all. So the state, what happened was that the industrial policy of a state is done so that when such privileges are given, are allocated, tax-related ones, I mean, but also financial ones, that is to say, to create development banks that would be able to give loans to these organizations, and also trade-related, connected with import and export, with all of that. If I'm not mistaken, all of this has created a situation, the three levers, that the organizations, that the companies that actually have the knowledge and the capacity to produce modern, services, products, start having the privileges from the country, from the state. So I was always thinking that this, in order for these decisions not to be adopted and made by one country, minister or ministry, then they should be actually country-wise. That is to say, there would be the entrepreneurs, scientists, the academic circles, business circles that would come together, also in close collaboration with the people responsible for policy development within ministries, so that together they could be thinking about what the strong points of Armenia are. For example, we have $100 million or $500 million. How does this need to be spent, allocated, distributed? What are the primary branches? What needs to be done actually? Which vector needs to be prioritized? Which sector needs to be prioritized? And if we manage to come to consensus and understand that this is a general decision that has been reached together from bottoms up, not top down, that would be great, and that would be better, because otherwise it would be top down and that would be unfair distribution. Why this organization didn't get that and another organization did get something like that, did get a privilege. So these consultations need to be done in a very open manner so that we know to which extent the privileges need to be allocated, so that the production, the export, all of that connected, related to the fourth industrial revolution be developed. I believe that we have another issue as well. We have a problem that I think is connected with the quality of workforce. We actually have quite low capacity of producing, roughly speaking, and very roughly speaking. In order to do one work done by a Lithuanian, we need 2 Armenians. And I think that the situation is not good. I fully agree with you. At the same time, I have always drawn parallels with Armenia and Armenia with the future development vectors. I have compared Armenia with the countries that are close to us historically. I compared Armenia with Switzerland, with Ireland, with Israel, and having shown their success stories, what I've said is that Armenia can reap the benefits, the recipe of benefits and the consequences of these benefits of these countries. That is to say that our population, our people are talented, but because there have been levels of impoverishment and of poor management as a prolonged situation, I should say, this is also psychology based because our leaders have thought that there is a famous word in Russian, they say administrative resources. That's a term that is being circulated a lot in the Russian media. But I should say in any case that even though we have had some success, briefly put, we need to think about increasing the level of education and about providing education to workers at their workplaces, creating many modern courses where they would boost and enhance and increase their knowledge quality, which in the long run will make our production capacity more successful as such. That's how I see the solution to this problem. And I'm also talking about the basic education that is being provided at university on the one side, and on the other hand, the continuous education done by employees. That is to say, it's lifelong learning principles we're talking about, because you have to learn throughout your entire life. And when you study something, you improve, you increase the productivity. I believe in such a case scenario, we will be close, we will reach up the level of Baltic countries and other countries as well. We actually see questions that are being sent our way. I am planning to ask this question, and I'm turning to the audience right now, trying to say that if you have any questions, we would actually be very, very happy if you write down your questions within these conversations, because Zoom allows us to do that through the chat function. And of course, I will be addressing these questions to my guest. My guest is Rouben Indjikian, who is a professor from Switzerland, who has many years of experience at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Rouben, my next question, actually it's like the other part of my next question. What is the role of Armenia in the region? How can Armenia be a regional player? But when we're talking around this question, let's first understand what we mean by saying region. Which region do we fall into? It's a truly interesting question. I've thought around this question for long, and I have come to the idea that if we imagine Armenia in the future, the way I want to imagine it, then I would first see all the experts related to the fourth industrial revolutions. That would be our main expert. Secondly, I would like to see the added value products that are not occupying a large space, so they can be shipped by plane for trade purposes. And the third point would be for me to see Armenia become a place, a location where foreign tourists like visiting. Also, patients can come to Armenian hospitals, or the youth actually comes and tries to study in Armenian universities. To this, I will also add that because we're also a country of Middle East and also post-Soviet country, it means that naturally we have two regions with which we have had historical links. So we need to reinforce these links so that we become attractive and convenient, positive business center for these countries like Ireland and Cyprus. That is to say, we have quite good and stable financial system because the dram, AMD, Armenian dram, is quite stable. And if we develop this and we continue this development, people can think about actually investing part of their money in Armenian banks because the conversion rates, exchange rates are fine. And there would be offshore organizations, companies, which would be able to develop their global business And not only Middle East and Kazakhstan, Russian people would be able to come here, but also Chinese, Indian entrepreneurs. That is to say, I see Armenia not, okay, despite Armenia being isolated in terms of roads, I should say that today in the global virtual economy, a train or a ship are of course important because $18 trillion worth of products are being shipped by plane and transported by train. But we can be part of the $5 trillion industry that is being shipped otherwise. And we can use the planes as a transport means in order to sell our diamonds, gold, watches, and also small packages of products, because the we have also complex but small scale products objects that we are able to produce, and this country is actually developed those that have this factor. Of course, we should say that in terms of the agriculture or beverages, we have a slow, gradual, we would say, movement, let's say through trains to Russia or somewhere else. Actually, that would be nice because our soil is fruitful and it's all delicious, the fruits we reap. And on the basis of this, we would be able to export different products, which we're doing. And of course, I would add to what you said that in the future, I don't know when, we may have relations with our neighbors, which would not put us in a situation where we have to think about how we how we're not going to use their territory. That is to say that we could use their territory to export something, but it's about the future, I'd say. In addressing your question that we need to be post-Soviet, we, in the region of post-Soviet countries and also East. Um, I'm thinking about our immediate neighbors like Azerbaijan, Georgia, Iran, etc., but also about our more farther neighbors like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and also Arabic countries. Because if we want to start playing a central role like Switzerland does, of course, it calls for peace. And the entrepreneurs of these countries would thus be interested in dealing with the geography of Armenia, which would be peaceful, and the countries would not have any disputes, any future threats of wars, because people are putting and investing their monies there. I understand, it's clear. We also need balanced and wise politics, so that we don't do what happened to some other countries where, for example, in Georgia, Turkish investors have already bought away great enterprises, which is a problem for Georgia because they're no longer Georgian. But I have another question. You have mentioned the word offshore. Does it mean that you see Armenia also as an offshore paradise? You know, I should say that all countries, many countries, let's say, many developing countries, they've tried to quite actively use this so-called liberal economic belt concept. That is to say, I'm not saying the entire country could be an offshore, but there are some places where foreign investors, foreign producers can open up factories, get some electricity that is cheap, water that is cheap, and for some 5-10 years, they are being exempt from taxes. And then they are able to create another direction of production and export in Armenia, because they are not doing it for Armenian consumers to consume this, but they are coming here because they see that the local workforce is convenient for them in terms of the price, in terms of the quality, so that their international strategy can be developed. For example, when I was the head of e-commerce in 2001, one of the sheikhs actually invited me to discuss the development of e-commerce. There was a conference in Dubai, and we were taken to an internet city, or there was a tour. That is to say that back in 2000 and 2001, they were planning to develop all of these companies related to e-commerce. And right now, this is one of the most developed parts of Dubai. And the same exists in Armenia. When we're talking about IT companies, they're located somewhere. And we know that in a specific place. It needs to be developed in Gyumri, in Vanadzor, in Dilijan, and other towns as well. Why not? What I'm trying to say is that there are some belts that may have some privileges, but the general regime is, of course, onshore, not offshore. Offshore is just about a couple of belts. And right now, the OECD countries, I don't really favor this regime. And they've just adopted a law that says that for the work that is being done outside, abroad, large companies have to pay at least 15% of taxes. This hasn't yet been adopted, but I think OECD is one of the recent OECD decisions that is just going to be implemented. Our conversation is truly interesting, and I have a couple of remaining questions, but unfortunately our conversation cannot be endless and infinite. For which reason, I'd like to ask you the questions that was actually written in the chat by Ashot Arakelian, one of our audience members. He is, one of our viewers is asking you, what do you think about having cooperation, collaboration with the Hike ID organization? Can you explain a little bit? High ID initiative, what does that mean? I don't know that one either. I can't explain because I don't know. What is it? ID in English means identity. So it means what? It's all about how Armenian identity is being developed, how it can be developed in global world. I believe, let's assume that this is the case because we don't know. If we assume that this is the answer to the question, then of course, Armenia, Artsakh, and the diaspora, they are three important, crucial points of Armenia, and it is due to their joint work that we need to generally record some success. And when we're talking about high ID, Armenian ID, I would say that it's fine, but I was actually talking with Arman Hukasyan, your conversation with Arman Hukasyan. I was listening to that when he said that not only your apartment, but your bank, your street, your country, they all need to be clean because all of this needs to be perceived as home. And because both of us live in Switzerland and we see that this is what is happening in the democratic model, that people are really owning the country as if it were a one big home, how they're really cleaning all of this and what the level of cleanliness is. This is important to highlight. So if this is part of high ID, of Armenian ID, then it would be more healthy because being very talented and smart people, we also should be more inclined towards cleanliness, towards education, and as such, and more organized. Thank you. We also have another question, which reminded me the beginnings of 1990s, the early 1990s, and our debates that we were having back then in Armenia. Can Armenia actually export potable water, tap water, and that would make us part of the global economy, and that would be part of our geography and geopolitics? Water, drinkable water, well, by the way, this is a very smart question, I should say, because now, as humanity, we are moving towards the global economy where politics where the clean production related to politics, that is to say, clean food, beverages, eco beverages. This is super important. So natural clean water, for which people are that have been part of the war, they have been also reasons for war, for waging a war, and because it was endowed to us by God, it's a gift sent down by God. Not only is it metals that God sent us, but also natural clean water. And if we are able to develop this production, then that is already being made in Jermuk, in Hrazdan. We see this happen. This needs to be continued to be developed. I just don't know if Armenian resource space of water would allow for such policy, because first we have to think about the populations that live there, and if the resources suffice, if they're sufficient, then this needs to be exported in the best way possible, at the highest quality, highest level, with the highest price, with the best optimal prices that would be consumed by our neighboring countries that would be able to buy this. And I think that Arabic countries would actually be happy to buy water. Thank you. And the last one, Lucine Galoyan is asking the last question that we're having today. And she's from the Armenia State Economic University. She's asking to give your contact details, because she's sure that you could be helping within the higher education sector of economic development. And if you would allow, we would do that after our conversation. Would that be fine? Of course, I would be delighted. That would be great. Thanks a lot. My guest today was Rouben Indjikian, professor of economics and management, who lives and works in Geneva. It is me who is thankful. Bye.